everyone, Jim Branscombe here for the Cinematic Void vlog. Now today's topic is kind of an idea I've had to do a video on for a while, a little bit or whatever, and just never really sat down to plan it out. And as I was trying to think of topics or themes or things to do movie vlogs about, I was kind of feeling like I didn't have anything to really talk about. I was kind of contemplating just taking a week off and had planned on it, but then I rewatched a movie that I enjoy a lot that kind of falls into what the theme of today's topic is going to be, which is action star slasher films. So what exactly do I mean by that? Well, it's a slasher film, and some cases might be slasher adjacent that happens to star like a big action movie star. People like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone. This is a little subgenre of a subgenre that's always interested me, and in fact, all the movies I'm going to talk about or mention today, I've actually screened. I haven't screened them in the context of a whole monthly theme of action movie stars in slasher movies, but I've pick and choose these movies and kind of screen them over the years, and I'll give a little context about when I screen these movies and that kind of stuff. This isn't going to be a top 5 or top 10 list. This is just going to be a few movies that just happen to have a action star starring in a slasher type movie. So why don't we go ahead and get into it? So let me propose something to you. Have you ever wanted to see a movie where Chuck Norris fought Michael Myers? Well, there kind of is a movie like that, and I'm talking about 1982's
Silent Rage.
I can't really attribute that quote to me. I think it was Quentin Tarantino who had basically said that Silent Rage is more or less Chuck Norris versus Michael Myers. And for those who haven't seen Silent Rage, there is a psychotic man that gets killed by the police. He gets taken to a lab, they start genetically engineering, messing around with him, and then they basically create a unstoppable killing machine that kind of acts like Michael Myers. Doesn't talk. He just, you hit him, you punch him, he gets back up and still tries to kill you. Pretty classic slasher trope there.
Now Chuck Norris must destroy him.
And Silent Rage doesn't stop with just the unstoppable killer kind of slasher trope. In fact, there's a long opening Steadicam shot that starts off the movie that is very reminiscent of a certain slasher that has a very famous opening tracking Steadicam shot, Halloween. So I don't think that was much of a coincidence. I actually screened this movie in 2016. This was actually the third movie I showed at Cinematic Void. This is also the first movie that I actually did a Q&A for as well. I had screenwriter Joseph Fraley, as well as the producer Anthony Unger, who was also a producer on Don't Look Now. That's quite a filmography there, going from Don't Look Now to Silent Rage. And we talked about the movie, and Joseph Fraley had done and worked on a bunch of Chuck Norris movies. And when I kind of asked him about, making a horror slasher type movie with Chuck Norris martial arts in it, they were like, oh, it wasn't a horror movie, we were just making an action movie. And if you watch Silent Rage, you're like, really? It seems like you were trying to make a horror movie with Chuck Norris martial arts in it, but I can understand why they're saying that. There's a big bar fight sequence where Chuck Norris shows off his spin kicks and whatnot, and it also has a heavy sci-fi angle with the genetic modifications to the killer, but the way it plays out is pretty much like a slasher movie. The film also stars Ron Silver, Stephen Furst, as well as William Finley, who most of you probably know and love him for being the Phantom from Brian De Palma's Phantom of the Paradise. If you haven't checked out Silent Rage, go see it in a theater if you can. There's a couple of 35mm prints out there. I screened on 35 back in 2016, and I also screened it back in 2022 for the 7th year anniversary of Cinematic Void. I did a little movie marathon where I played a bunch of films that I had previously played again as a mystery marathon, and Silent Rage was one of those titles. That marathon took place at the Era Theater in Santa Monica, and my good friend Deanna Rooney, who some of you might know from Mystery Science Theater 3000 and a bunch of comedy sketches I used to do on the Cinematis movie as well. If you've gone to any in-person voids, you've seen her and I do some bits as well. She did bits for pretty much every movie I screened that day, but we did a very special Silent Rage themed bit, except she played the wrong Chuck.
Wrong Chuck, wrong Chuck, wrong Chuck, wrong Chuck. Wrong Chuck. Sorry, Chuck. But the Chuck tonight is Chuck Norris, and we're showing Silent Rage.
And speaking of Chuck Bronson and the Aero Theater, well, the next film I'm going to be talking about features both of them. It is 1983's
10 to Midnight.
For those of you who haven't seen 10 to Midnight, a LAPD cop played by Charles Bronson is on the hunt for a psychotic killer that's targeting young women, and it's really sleazy, it's really grody, and in fact, this could have easily made both my top 10 LA sleaze film list as well as my top 10 Giallo adjacent film list, because it has both those elements, and I really love this movie. And as I mentioned, it does feature the Aero Theater. There's some pivotal scenes early in the film that take place at the Aero Theater, which I've done many screenings there. The Aero Theater has also been featured in other movies such as Donnie Darko and Sleepwalkers, and if you go a little bit further back on the vlog or just go to the playlist of filming location videos I've done, you can see I did a little 10 to Midnight filming location video featuring the Aero Theater and showed you different spots that were used in the movie that are still at the theater. I know some of you might feel like this is more of a police procedural thriller, you know, serial killer movie as opposed to an outright slasher, but I think Gene Davis's naked killer kind of constitutes as a slasher villain for, you know, it's got a gimmick. Most slasher villains have a gimmick. Most have masks and stuff. He's just running around naked, killing people. This movie also has some great one-liners from Charlie Bronson, as a hilarious scene involving a adult stimulation toy. And lastly, I had the opportunity to screen 10 to Midnight at the Aero Theater as part of a 3-year anniversary triple feature I did for Cinematic Void. And it was really cool to watch a movie that was shot partially in the theater that you're watching it in. I don't know, I like that kind of stuff. Like 10 to Midnight, this movie was also produced by the Candid Film Group, you know, Golden Globus, who made all kinds of crazy action movies. However, this doesn't star either Chuck Bronson or Norris. It actually stars Sylvester Stallone, who also wrote the script. I'm talking about 1986's Cobra. Now, some of you might feel like this might be a little bit of a stretch to get to a slasher, but I think there's enough elements there. Yeah, the plot primarily deals around a cult that is killing people, but their leader is called the Night Slasher, and he has a crazy knife that he uses to slash people. So the guy literally has slasher in his name, so of course I had to include this movie. Now, this film does tread on a few of the themes from 10 to Midnight, but really where this movie came from was a version of the Beverly Hills Cop script that Sylvester Stallone had been working on when he was originally attached to the film. He didn't want to be in a comedy, so he did a rewrite. The producers of Beverly Hills Cop was like, that's not really a direction we want to go in, so he dropped off the film. And Stallone took all of his ideas for Beverly Hills Cop and put them in Cobra. I don't know if the pizza being cut with scissors thing was in the Beverly Hills Cop draft of this or not, but now in the context of when I screened this movie, this ended up being the first movie I showed when I was allowed to do screenings back in a movie theater again after the 2020 lockdown. Now, before I get into this next film, I should mention that one of the big inspirations for Cobra for Sylvester Stallone was the first Dirty Harry movie, so I felt like it's only fitting to include a movie starring Dirty Harry himself, Clint Eastwood, on this list. And I've actually recently talked about this film on my Giallo adjacent list, which is
Tightrope.
In case you haven't seen that video, I'm just going to do a very, very brief explanation of what this film is about. Clint Eastwood plays a New Orleans cop on the search for a sex crime killer, but Clint has his own secrets, very kinky secrets, that the killer finds out about and then starts targeting people in his life related to said secrets. Now, as I already mentioned, this was on my Giallo adjacent list, so if you want to hear me talk more about Tightrope and some of its background, go check out that list. But I thought it'd be worth mentioning Tightrope because, yeah, it's Giallo adjacent, but it's also slasher adjacent too, and I really like this movie. I really want more people to check it out, and if you haven't yet, check out my Giallo adjacent list because there's probably some slasher adjacent stuff on there too if you're looking for that kind of stuff. Now, for the last film I want to talk about today for action star slasher films, I've been very focused on the action star fighting the slasher, but for this one, the action star is the slasher. And I'm talking about 1984's The Terminator, directed by James Cameron. And yeah, if you really think about it and, you know, replace a robotic cyborg with Michael Myers, the movie plays out pretty much like a slasher film, you know? Linda Hamilton's character is essentially the final girl. And if you know anything about James Cameron, you know, he started out in the effects department at New World Pictures and had worked on some other movies. In fact, he had worked on John Carpenter's Escape from New York in the effects department. And James Cameron was a big fan of John Carpenter, so he took his inspiration of Carpenter, you know, and probably Halloween, and filtered into what became one of the biggest sci-fi action films ever made. I actually screened this back in December 2024, and I had the absolute privilege of having the producer, Gail Ann Hurd, there in person. She did an introduction, she sat through, watched the movie, and then we talked about the movie afterwards, and it was an absolute delight. And not only was that one of my favorite screenings I got to do in 2024, it's actually one of my favorite screenings I got to do pretty much ever for Cinematic Void. So there you go, 5 different films that star action stars that also happen to be slasher films. Sound of comments, let me know what you think of this list, since I'm not really numbering or ranking them, just talking about them. I guess, you know, video where I talk about things. And if there was a slasher film that happens to star an action star that I didn't mention, sound off the comments, let me know there. You know, I'm really hoping that there's a Leatherface versus Steven Seagal movie out there that I just somehow missed along the way. Also, if you enjoy these videos or the content I make here at Cinematic Void, consider subscribing and liking and all that stuff you're supposed to do on YouTube. Helps the channel grow. Actually, what really helps the channel grow is that if you enjoy this video, share it with someone you know. Get more eyes on this stuff. And with that, thank you for watching, and until next time, see you in the void.
I'll be back.